All right, well, let's move on to Dr. Fauci, who sat for a very long interview in the New York Times that was published this week. He had some interesting things to say. One of my favorites is he says, when people say, quote, Fauci shut down the economy, it wasn't Fauci, referring to himself in the third person. The CDC was the organization that made those recommendations. I happen to be perceived as the personification of the recommendations, but show me a school that I shut down and show me a factory that I shut down. Never. I never did. I gave a public health recommendation that echoed the CDC's recommendation, and people made a decision based on that. All right, let's actually just roll right into the SOT. We have E2 here. You can make your own decision up based on what Fauci just said there and what Fauci says here.
I recommended to the president that we shut the country down. And that was a very difficult decision, because I knew it would have serious economic consequences.
All right, so technically not mutually exclusive. There He's saying, I recommended to the president that we shut the country down, but you can see how he's much more eager to take credit for having a pivotal voice in those recommendations, for being one of the recommenders that actually mattered and convinced Donald Trump to shut the country down. And then when it's not convenient for him to take credit, he said, well, no, I was just one of the many people making recommendations that would echo the CDC.
Ron DeSantis, if he actually does end up running, will love to make hay out of that distinction. Say, actually, it wasn't Fauci. It was shut down Trump.
100%.
Trump's the one that shut down the economy because he was, he had Anthony Fauci in his ear, couldn't stand up to 5'5" Anthony Fauci.
Yeah, as DeSantis referred to him as an elf that needed to be chucked into the Potomac. And further, they're actually already fighting about this, about the shutdown timeline. DeSantis and Trump. And DeSantis isn't even a declared candidate.
There you go. All right. I have just that intuitive sense of what these Republicans are going to go at each other
Republican
about.
strategists.
There you go. But to me, Fauci should just own it. Like, trying to make a distinction between, okay, yes, we can all agree that Fauci was not a dictator in 2020 and was not able to just, by his own pen, kind of dictate American policy. There was a process that was involved in Anthony Fauci's kind of public policy ideas becoming the policy ideas that we all followed, and that involved, him talking to the president, him talking to the CDC, and him talking to the media and becoming kind of the face of the COVID response. So to me, it would just be so much more helpful as we're thinking through our response to the pandemic if he would just say, yeah, these were my recommendations. Here's how I think about them in hindsight. And he can even say, like, look, in the moment, you're never going to get every single call correctly in an unprecedented scenario. Here's the information that I had, and here's why I made the decision. Here's the reasons I think it was a good decision. Here's the reasons I think it wasn't. Instead, he's going to get all tangled up in, well, look, man, I was just spitballing. It was Trump that really kind of ran the show. Or
blame the CDC. He keeps blaming the CDC, acting as though that why did you make the recommendation if it didn't matter, Dr. Fauci? And go ahead.
Right. He wants to blame the CDC, except when he doesn't want to defer to them when it comes to the origin of the pandemic.
Right. Yeah, so no, of course not. And let's put E3 up on the screen. He got into masking as well, and this really, I saw some people reacting to this rightfully with a lot of anger. He says, from a broad public health standpoint at the population level, masks work at the margins, maybe 10%. He goes on to say that if you wear like a properly fitted N95, they really do work. That's his take. But again, it's just, he's so flippant about saying these things that a couple of years ago were really affecting the daily lives of many, many, many Americans. And here's another one. Like, to your point, Ryan, he sort of toes the line. Like, he creeps up to the line of taking some blame and accountability. He says, when asked by the New York Times, this is actually a pretty tough interview, and Fauci at a couple points gets upset with the interviewer, which I think also reflects an incredible sense of entitlement. But he says, we probably should have communicated better that the clinical trials about the vaccines were only powered to look look at the effect on clinically recognizable disease, symptomatic disease. So saying, we should have communicated better that the vaccines weren't going to function like vaccines that people think of when they think of the definition of what a vaccine is. So he sort of flirts with taking some accountability. He says, we probably should have communicated better, and then goes into this like dense medical language. And also, here's another quote from the interview. Did we say that the elderly were much more vulnerable? Yes. Did we say it over and over and over again? Yes, yes, yes. But somehow or other, the general public didn't get that feeling that the vulnerable are really, really heavily weighted toward the elderly. So again, he continues to blame the public. You see this over and over in the interview where he's completely saying, listen, we did what we were supposed to do, but the public is just so dumb and angry. He continues to blame divisiveness. He invokes that word over and over again as though it's a totally detached phenomenon from him, that he would have nothing to do with that divisiveness, even though he changed his tune on masks, even though he changed his tune on a number of different issues. Lab leak, for instance, we have emails that show he's saying things differently in public and in private. He is not willing to grapple with any of that. Instead, what he does is continue to just sort of use this language that superficially admits some minor mistakes here and there, but then blames it on the public for being too dumb and too divided to really understand what he was saying.
I do think that so many people experienced the pandemic personally that it did break through that the elderly were much more vulnerable than others, and also the morbidly obese was the comorbidity that was so tightly associated with it, which everybody kind of stayed away from, including Fauci, for I think sensitivity reasons that backfired on for a lot of people. But I do think that gets to his fundamental flaw, which was a lack of trust in the public and a misunderstanding of the kind of government's ability to influence public opinion in an era of social media and divided kind of media loyalties. And so I think what he felt like was, I'm going to err on the side of fudging. I'm going to say that, herd immunity is this much closer than it really is, because I don't trust people will reach the goal of herd immunity if I say where it is. Like, he has said that he was wrong about that, or that he lied about that. He admitted that he lied about masks early on because he said he was nervous that the public would panic and would go out and buy up all the masks. And so he kind of lied about their effectiveness early, undermining his own authority. And I think he didn't lean into the vulnerability of the elderly population more because, he's saying he regrets it, but he didn't do it because he was nervous that if he said that some people would read it as, oh, well, that population is more vulnerable, therefore I'm less vulnerable, therefore I'm not going to care about any of these precautions.
Right.
And so he went overboard.
Right.
And he erred on the side of telling everybody that they're more vulnerable than they actually might have been, and then that ends up undercutting his authority in the eyes of a lot of people. And
I think one of the reasons that people interpreted them as not saying, the elderly were the most vulnerable over and over again is because the guidelines that he recommended and that the CDC put out treated everybody as though they were just as vulnerable as the elderly, and locked everyone down and didn't do a whole lot of isolating vulnerable populations for, in some cases, sensitivity reasons. But anyway, basically everybody was lumped into that category. We do have one more on one of Ryan's hobby horses here from the interview.
I put up Josh Rogan's tweet here.
Yeah, this is E4. He started talking about the lab leak. Fauci says there, this quote is actually really funny. He agrees that it was not. He says all intel agencies, quote, agreed that this was not an engineered virus. He says the DNI assessment says, quote, most assessed with low confidence, quote, probably not engineered. He also says if it escaped a lab, even if it did escape a lab, quote, that ain't a lab leak. What did you make of that, Ryan?
So his argument is that if somebody went to a cave, a couple hundred or a couple thousand miles away from Wuhan, collected bat samples, got infected doing that work, came back to the lab, left the lab, went around Wuhan and spread the virus, that's not a lab leak. I think what he means by a lab leak, which is actually disturbing if this is where his mind goes, because it means that it's something he's thought a lot about.
I would hope so. He was funding it.
But then, right, why are you continuing to fund it? What he it seems to think of as a lab leak is that you are specifically engineering a kind of very highly pathogenic virus, and then that leaks out.
Right.
Rather than you're collecting viruses, doing work on them, and because of poor kind of PPE, that you get infected, and then your workers leave. That's somehow not a lab leak.
Yeah.
Which is that's one of the most frightening things I've heard, because if he's like, if public policy officials and politicians are coming to him and coming to the NIH in general and saying, look, we want to make sure that there are no lab leaks going on when it comes to the work that you're doing around here. And his mind goes to a place of, oh no, don't worry, there's no lab leaks. Just maybe a couple of researchers getting infected and spreading viruses that they're working on and producing pandemics. But that's not a lab leak. And if you don't know how his mind is working, you don't know to ask that follow-up question.
Yeah.
All you hear is, oh, we're good.
It's incredible because he even talks in this interview about his back and forth with Rand Paul on gain of function, the definition of gain of function, and it's the same tactic. He's doing the same thing with the lab leak definition that he did with the gain of function definition. He tries to exhaust the interviewer by filibustering with these completely abstruse, like, medical definitions of what is, what isn't, and like how this is, really semantically not technically gain of function, not technically a lab leak, and all of it is just like this incredible cover for things we still don't have answers from him about. And for him to just sit there and say, if anything, all we did wrong was underestimate the idiocy of the American public, I just think is like unbelievable. And if I were anyone close to Dr. Fauci, I would recommend that he stop doing interviews at this point, because the more he talks, the more fodder there is to just realize the well that this is springing from is one that is very much, and I understand, listen, like, he's been attacked more than anyone, I think for some good reason, but just psychologically, you're going to feel like you're, in trench warfare, and you have to lash out at everyone. It's not a good look.
Right. Not a good look at all.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Sagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.